Greetings and welcome to today's CFO Leadership Council program, Getting Beyond the Numbers, telling your financial story. Given the challenges you're all facing currently, we are especially honored that you have chosen to connect with us today. And of course, a special thanks to Certain, today's exclusive webcast sponsor. Certain Inc., founded in 2002, helps customers elevate their business with smart, intuitive solutions for modern finance. For more info, be sure to connect with them at certain.com. Our guest speakers today are Kevin Beckberger, Vice President of Global Solutions Engineering at Certain, Daryl Cox, CFO of Vena Solutions, Amanda Doogie, Director of Finance at Zebra Technologies, and moderator today, Jack McCullough, founder of the CFO Leadership Council. My name is Kristen Todd. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for the CFO Leadership Council, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Joining me today from the CFOLC team and working her magic behind the scenes is Katie Todd, Manager of Partner Relations. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Your lines are muted so that there are no distractions. However, we encourage your questions throughout today's program. Type them in the question area in your dashboard and I'll ask on your behalf. Today's program qualifies for 1 CPE credit. To qualify, you must be a current CFOLC member and answer all of the polling questions in today's program. In order to answer those polling questions, you must be logged in. If you've dialed in and need CPEs, please hang up and use that direct link provided to you at registration. Also, at the end of today's program, you'll receive a quick 30-second survey. We hope you'll complete that, as we do love your feedback. Be sure to connect with us online as well. Our website, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube will get you the latest CFOLC and industry news. We have several programs coming up to kick off our 2021 season. Be sure to connect and check out that full calendar online. If you're not a current CFOLC member and are interested, we have several levels of membership: premium access and standard access. All levels of membership include CFO Connect, our online members only forum, and recordings of all of our programs. And now it's my pleasure to quickly introduce today's moderator, our own Jack McCullough. Jack is recognized as a thought leader in the world of financial leadership with a career that has included CFO positions at 26 companies. He founded the CFO Leadership Council back in 2006, is chair of the MIT Sloan CFO Summit, and is a published author. Jack, you can take it from here.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Other than the CEO, the CFO is the most important communicator in most companies. An increasingly critical role for the modern financial chief is to inspire confidence in all constituents: investors, employees, customers, suppliers, and sometimes even the general public. This is almost impossible to do if the CFO is just a good numbers person. Today's program is about getting beyond the numbers to tell a story. If you think of financial data as a science, then sharing the story behind the data is an art. The ability to communicate both the art and science to diverse audiences is an invaluable skill for finance chiefs, and in 2020 more so than ever. Hi everybody, my name is Jack McCullough. I am the president of the CFO Leadership Council, and I do want to thank you again for joining us for what is our final webinar of 2020. I'm probably smiling as I say final anything of 2020, but thank God. I think you're actually going to find this is a great conversation, because the secret to any great conversation is to have great speakers involved, and we have 3. I'd like to take a moment to have all of them introduce themselves, and Kevin, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks Jack, and thanks everyone for joining. My name is Kevin Beckberger. I'm representing Certain, as was indicated. I lead our solutions team here at Certain, and our main focus is around narrative reporting and narrative report production for both internal and external reporting. And I've had the opportunity over 20 plus years in accounting and financial software to, in the last 10, actually focused in this specific area to really travel around the globe actually, and understanding the complexities of narrative reporting, and certainly some of the nuances that come along with that. And I think as we get into the details of today's webinar, I'm really interested to hear both Daryl and Amanda's views on this as well. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks Kevin. Daryl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daryl Cox, CFO at Bena Solutions. And by way of a brief intro, I've been doing this for longer than I want to admit, but it'll probably leak through in some of the our conversations. I came up through the FP&A side of the house, and I've always seen my role, and still my role is kind of like sometimes I describe myself as a chief storyteller. This is a subject that's really close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. And part of, I think, of how I came into this role and why I like it so much is a little bit about because of how I got to where I am. I ran my own business for 6 years. I built some web apps in another career. I worked in BD. More recently as a CFO, well, as a dad. And I see commonalities in all of those things, right? It's like, the finance leader is not someone that always makes all the important decisions. They're an important person giving a point of view and more of an influencer. And I see, that is a common thing in all those roles I've had as a business owner, as a business development person, or as a leader leading a bunch of web developers to build web apps, and as a finance leader and as a dad. I can't tell my teenagers what to do. That just doesn't work. I mean, they're making their own decisions. Just like at the office, I can't tell everybody exactly what they should be doing, but I can certainly influence that. And the way to influence them is to understand what they want and to get to a good story. Like, really, if you can tell a good story, you're going to have a much better chance of getting them to do what you hope they do. Anyway, that's my story.
Well, we will share stories of raising teenagers at our next conversation. So, Amanda, let's hear a little about your own background.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Amanda Doogie. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Boston CFO Leadership Council with Jack, Kristen, and team. I was the CFO of a small SaaS company in Massachusetts, Profitect Inc., for about 2 years before being acquired by a larger public company in the technology and hardware space, where I stayed on as the director of finance to help build out a software and solutions strategy of what is a historically hardware company. Of course, much of the last 3 years, I've been managing process improvements in that smaller business, leading to the sale process, due diligence, and post M&A integration, which all integrate a lot of thoughtful storytelling. Before that, I was an operations BU finance partner to several businesses in the clinical trial space. And while that included a lot of legacy business units, I also focused heavily on the M&A side. So leading a lot of M&A integrations for acquired companies, ensuring their transition into the larger organization was optimal for synergies and growth. And, there you're telling the story of both the acquired company and the parent company and making sure that culture aligns and that you're optimizing at every level. What I loved about that as well was, getting to work across several operating models, is every operating model can be turned into its own story as to how it, propels the company overall into growth. So, and it's important to tell a story. It's a way that people understand how to impact change where they can, as opposed to just throwing facts at people. In a small private company, much of storytelling is educating and influencing the cross functions, like Daryl just mentioned. And it's not just turning budget numbers, which you got to turn it from a daunting process that everyone wants to avoid, instead motivating them to make it mean something for them. So it's a series of small negotiations always. And I always say, what I do with my spreadsheets late at night, nobody needs to see that. It's turning that into a story, right? If I tell the head of R&D, you can hire a new person if you pull up the release by 3 months, because that upsell revenue comes through. If you realize X savings on, cloud hosting, we can do, we can give you X amount of dollars for the initiative that you're really excited about. You just have to speak their language and bring them along to help write the story with you. And obviously in a small company, it's about management of the board and partnership with the CEO. So when the CEO is a really great salesperson and storyteller, you can learn a lot from them. But be sure when the board looks at you, you can tie that story to facts and figures. That's the most important piece. And I always think of storytelling as more of, it's not just one story, it's choose your own adventure in our world, right? Because you always want to have your scenarios, if this happens, then we will expect this. And it's important to level set that across the cross functions and with the board, because there may be others telling one very optimistic story, and you just need to continue level setting and making sure you're reiterating so that there are no surprises down the road when we see some of these risks, especially like in this year, right?
Yeah, a year unlike any other, to say the least. So cool. Well, that's great. Thanks. Kristen, this seems like a good time to launch our first polling question. And I will remind folks that those who need CPE or the equivalent, since two of our speakers are actually from the Toronto, Canada area, I believe. So you will need to answer all of these questions. If for some reason, it just doesn't work for you, send me an email with your answer. My email is jack@cfolc.com, and I won't have you not get CPE for that. So.
Thank you, Jack. Poll's officially been launched and people are answering as we speak.
Okay, why don't we go to our first question then, and alpha by last name. So I'll start with you, Kevin, again. And you, Kevin, I know you work with a lot of CFOs. And have you seen a change in the way that they're telling their company stories, both internally and externally? And is that different for public versus private companies?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And you're right. We do work with senior level finance executives right up to the CFO office, and all those that are obviously contributors to this this reporting or storytelling sort of process. And yes, I think there has been a unique change in the way that organizations view not just the collection, but the contribution from around the organization of the information that's needed to tell the story. As Amanda just indicated, tying those facts and figures to the story is an important piece of the puzzle. And certainly if you're a public company, and Amanda, you have, of course, exposure in both roles, I think you're regulated or mandated to tell that story on a periodic basis. And those companies obviously already have a template for doing that. And I think that the bigger challenge is ensuring that there is a consistency across that story from an internal perspective. Now, the presentation of that information will obviously be different to an internal versus an external audience, but the story surrounding it should be the same. And oftentimes it's not. And that, of course, will drive controllers and CFOs crazy, because if the revenue number internally is not tying with the revenue number that you're reporting externally, there's obviously an issue there. And then, of course, that would change the story as well. So I think transparency is another area I'm seeing a lot more of now, a lot more transparency on the internal reporting side. And I'm sure both Daryl and Amanda will get involved in that conversation today, where the more solution and systems that we bring and investments we make into those and allow the information to come to us in a more expedient fashion, it gets to our hands faster, and therefore giving us more time to tell a proper story around that detail before it becomes kind of stale or almost extinct. If you're, and this involves lots of different things, so we won't get into here, number of days to close and all of that stuff. But that's where I think the biggest change has happened. And similar to solutions around consolidations and budgeting and planning, Daryl knows that area very well with his organization today. That is a well-known area where people make investments to help in telling this story from a numbers position. But very few people look at solutions to surround and tie, again, those facts and figures to an actual narrative. And I think in bringing those together, which is certainly one area that we look at here and concentrate on at Certain, bringing those numbers and narratives together in a solution centralized way so that that story is the same across multiple outputs is some of the change that we're starting to see. And companies start to make investments in, excuse me.
Makes sense. Amanda, how about you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, having been in a much smaller company as well as pivoting in and out of a few larger organizations, I think it's very centered as well around timing. So when public companies have a certain window of scope and time that they're comfortable discussing, right, carefully managing the long-term projections and keeping consistent metrics, experience with private companies has really shown that there's less consistency of what's being reported. And so, depending on that particular period or year's performance and what leadership would really like to highlight can be highly variable, which is it's actually a challenge, because I think it makes it more difficult then to consistently talk about some of the variables or the risks and opportunities around some of the year-to-year performance and where we're going. And I think consistency of the metrics is something that small companies do really need to focus on, because over time that story needs to connect, because that's the way that you can build credibility.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I just want to note for the record, we went until 12:17 until one of us used the word pivot. So that does seem to be the word on every webinar I'm involved in. It usually comes up 3 or 4 times. So, but cool. But that's great. Daryl, what about you? What are some of your observations on this?
I think that that's good finance leaders are still trying to achieve the same things when they pull their story together. They're still trying to, some things haven't changed. Like they're still trying to know who they're speaking to, who their audience is, what motivates them, what they care about, and trying to get to the heart of the issue. I think that recently, over the past few years, especially there's been so many technological changes that it's really helping. So I think that Kevin spoke a little bit about this. The big trends I see happening for the CFO that's helping. I mean, we've always tried to get out of just the finance stuff, so the financial numbers will tell you a bit of the story, but by combining the finance numbers with, operational numbers from other places, get you a better story. You can dig in, get a better business explanation on why something happening, for example. But technology is really helping, but also not helping. I mean, there's so much more data. I mean, all that more data can help get to the story, but sometimes it's just so hard to get to all the data. So things that are happening now, way more data, but also the tools available for the finance professional are so much better. And I'm seeing increasingly CFOs invest in that technology, and in particular, to bring together information from different parts of the organization and combine it so you get like really interesting key performance indicators. And also in the pivot, so you brought up the pivot, like, wow, that's the first time we heard pivot in this discussion. Yeah, now it's 20 minutes in, now it's the second time we heard it. It was so important to be able to get that non-financial information so that you could get the early warning signals, like the leading indicators. Like financial data is always like late, right? It's after the fact. Oh, you lost a customer. Okay, so you can count that. That's like 1 in lost customer, column. But it's like, why'd that happen? You could have predicted that, probably. And was it a surprise, really? If you were looking at customer behavior numbers from your platform way up, maybe you would have noticed they stopped using it or something like that, but that's not in your financial data. So a finance person who wants to get a story out to their organization and maybe assist in a pivot, get there, make sure that you're at the net to take the pass, not just like, starting off from the blue line and the puck's like, then you're out of the game, right? It's like, so the tools available for finance people are so much better now. And I'm seeing a lot more people grab a hold of that. It's not just Excel, it's not just your GL. It's like getting that data, combining it into one place, and getting that story out at the right time to the right people, what people want to hear. I can just talk all day on this, but I'll probably let you ask another question.
No, that's great. And it's funny because I've done a couple of webinars with Daryl, and he always brings in a hockey analogy too. So that's great. But why don't we stick with you, Daryl? And I know actually Amanda had a similar question. So, it was great. But why don't you, if you're willing and comfortable, what's the most difficult story that you've had to share in your role as a finance leader? And, what have you learned about delivering unpleasant news?
Oh man, well, over my career, I've made plenty of gaffes in delivering unpleasant stories, or unpleasant news without a good story. But thankfully, I have learned something. I mean, I'm old enough that I should have learned something by now. I've never had to stand in front of a company and say that it's done. So thankfully, I've never had to do that. I've had to lay off few people for performance and otherwise, and that was never good. But probably the most common things, thankfully, I've had to do is like, tell an audience, like a board or executives, that we didn't make some target, and that can be unpleasant. And I've frequently had to cut back budgets. Not only, if I could just stick to those, I think that probably the most important thing I learned in all of that, again, is how important it is to know who you're talking to and what they want to hear and how to deliver, finding the best way to deliver that, and then to frame it with in the most positive way and use all the numbers at hand to kind of put that picture together. And I can think of some really unpleasant moments in my career where I've gone up somewhere and stood on like it's metaphorical stage or a real stage and said like we've missed a target without framing it properly, and going back to the ranch later and getting my head ripped off because that's not the way I should have described it. I'm like, well, that was the facts, right? No, but that the facts and the story are sometimes they're related and they could be exactly the same, but you can make people feel a lot different and act different ways in how you deliver it. And probably the biggest win from that learning was there's been lots of wins, but probably my most recent one anyway, would have to be in the fundraising experiences I've had at Vena, and how you characterize your growth and how you characterize your cost of acquisition. So are you spending all your cost of acquisition on your main line of business, or are you experimenting in certain areas? And can you take them apart and tell the story about the main line of business? And if you can, how much better does that look if you can describe other components of your acquisition costs as experiments and how they're going to bring you value in the future? And then you can talk about the cohort, right? And so it's the same data, it's just taken apart and characterized differently, all accurate, just exposing different things and making a much more interesting story. Yeah. So when you talk about difficult, it's not only always about bad news, it's about finding the good news inside of a whole bunch of news. Like, what is that good thing, and bringing it to the forward, focusing the attention properly. I think that's probably the most difficult thing. It's not actually bad news, it's finding the good news.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing you mentioned that, because CFOs don't want to be thought of somebody who spins bad news, right? That's what you've got marketing people for. No offense, Kristen, but yeah, CFOs, they say what they mean and they mean what they say, and if they're perceived as spinning bad news, it's not good. But Amanda, I'd love to hear a little bit of your insights on this as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's really, what do you want to get out of the story? What do you want people to get out of the story? So, I think for our role, some people want to leave everyone with a good feeling, right? And it's not always the case. So I feel like it's a lot of upstream preparation and planting those seeds. If we encounter this issue, here's how the end of the year will look, and here's what that means for your department, right? And I think it's all about laying those seeds down so that there's no surprises. But it's also it's about being able to put a mirror up, because your job, a lot of people come to you in confidence, right? Or they want to bounce something off you, and you're dealing with all of these overarching metrics back and forth. So the sales team comes to you and says, well, we're not selling. Well, it's because we've lost customers, and that's another team. There's a lot of finger pointing, right? Or that's because of the product. What you really need to do is be able to slice through the noise, and first you have to have empathy, you have to listen, you have to build relationships, right, with these people, because you have to be able to influence across each function. But then together you need to be able to say, well, I understand, but if you look at and kind of put their numbers back on them, they're what they can control, and really, like I said, put a mirror up and say, did you realize this? Because sometimes you'll see their deer in headlights and go, oh my God, they didn't realize this. And I think it's a lot about educating, right? Did you realize that in the last 12 months, we haven't signed one new customer? It's like, and I think it's just like, people are very busy in the day-to-day, they're running their teams, sometimes it's just getting really simple about, and the answer to did you realize is often, oh my God, no, I didn't realize that. And so earlier in my career, I remember never wanting to show up with the same data twice. So I thought, well, this person knows how to run his business. It's a GM of a business. I don't want to always show up with the same story. But then really, it's over time, they're really looking for that. Like, without the consistency and reiterating and keeping the story going, if you're constantly moving from metric to metric or something new each time, it's not digestible in the same way. And so as you're trying to, whether you're working with very senior leadership, it comes down to that business acumen and returning to the basics. But also as you get more junior in the organization, as you work through the teams, it's really, really important to keep it simple and always be educating as you tell your story, and then bring them along so that everyone can start to speak the same language and understand how their part, even though very small, it, you know, elicits this much change in the overall value in the overall objectives.
Yeah, that's important. Repeating. It's the same message to lots of different people. You can show it different ways. 100% agree. Oh yeah, so important. Simple.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Kevin, love to hear from you on this before we go to our next polling. Actually, polling question not for a little while, but what are you seeing out there with some of your clients and in your own experience as well about sharing bad news?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I have a unique perspective, obviously, on this panel where, you know, I'm working with organizations to help, you know, bring some efficiency and consistency, as was mentioned, to this storytelling sort of process for Daryl. But of course, the main objective, I think, and I'll share a story here. One of the things that we did internally is I did present this concept of narrative reporting to our CFO here at Certain, and we're a private organization. So we had responsibility to the board, and we have responsibilities, of course, to our employees to tell those stories. And, you know, I had them challenge me on how I was going to present to other organizations, you know, senior financial leadership. And, you know, one of the things that did come up that was a challenging part of telling the story at our company was once I presented my, I guess, sort of pitch, if you will, on how I could help improve things and bring efficiency and make people work better together, you know, collaborating and bringing the numbers and narratives together in the right way and on time and all of those great things. One of the people in the room that report up to the CFO said, well, that's not going to work here because every single period, our story changes slightly due to something that's being requested by the board or maybe the CFO themselves. And the CFO piped up and said, that is our problem. We need to standardize. We need to be, for comparability purposes, standardize our reporting up to a certain degree. I mean, there are things that are always going to change period over period, and this was more of a monthly or quarterly view. That standardization had to happen before looking at something like a solution or investing in some technology, as Daryl mentioned, to help with this. First, it had to start with themselves and understanding how do we tell the right story, make it consistent, make it comparable so people can follow us on that journey. So if something wasn't great in January, has it improved by March? And what is the story behind that improvement? And hopefully it is always an improvement if there was things going wrong. So that's probably from my perspective anyway, the story that is closest to me. And that is consistent to conversations we have across the globe with CFOs and again, senior financial leaders in this role.
Makes a lot of sense. Hey, Kristen, do you want to share the results of our first polling questions? I think the audience might find it interesting. And if I missed my window, I apologize.
No, don't worry about it. Here we go. Do you want me to read them to you all? Can you see them?
Yeah,
okay?
there might be a few people dialing in.
Sure. How would you describe the current level of narrative in your financial reporting? 11% answered just the facts, 54% additional details available where needed, and 35% an integral element of our reporting. Any thoughts on that?
Kevin, is that at all surprising to you?
A little bit. I mean, I think, like I said, there's been a lot of change even over the past sort of 4 to 5 years with, again, solutions being part of the technology being part of the report production process now. That's obviously helped to bring additional details in a more timely fashion as well. Not just the data. Data is, as Daryl mentioned, there's a lot of it and it's constantly available. You know, in more volume than it ever has been, but it's combining that again into that story you want to tell that sometimes is the challenge. So I think people are starting to get there, but probably still in that 54%, they probably still is more they'd like to tell. It's just the time they have to get that story together is probably the more problematic part of that.
Huge problem. Yeah, finance department that spends their entire month end right up to the date the report is ready, just getting the numbers together. You're never going to get just the facts, and story when needed. It's like that narrative should be. I like to make sure that we have exactly the best narrative we can every single report. Never just send out the report. It's always like in the email or in the communication. Otherwise, there's like the whole story. Then look at the report if you want. So exactly the reverse. But I mean, I wouldn't be able to get a story without that report. Like all the work happens in the back, right? But making sure all that data is combined and pulled together, and it has to be fast. It has to be fast. If it's slow, takes all your time to do the report, that's no good.
Yeah, by the time you get the information out, it's no longer valuable to anybody, right?
It's no longer valuable. And I mean, without a story, it's just like, who's going to read it? So much information flies at CEOs and executives all day long. They just need the summary. And that summary is the story.
Yeah, so indeed. Kristen, this might not be a bad time to launch our second polling question, if you would. And while that's going on, I'm going to ask Amanda. Amanda, if you found it challenging to keep your story consistent, because you basically got the same core set of facts, but I know that you present financial information to a lot of different audiences. So you're taking the same data and facts and presenting it differently. What are some of the challenges you're facing in that?
Right, so I think you have to make each story have meaning to the team that you're trying to motivate, and you focus on that, but you have to be careful not to focus so much that it's in a vacuum, right? If they're leaders and you're talking about VPs or department heads of across the organization, they need to be tied in from their story perspective and then the company's story. And I think that some of the challenges here too tie back to if you're in finance and you're telling a story, there's obviously some lessons learned, is to make sure it's not punitive. So you have to, again, that comes back to the relationship building and the influencing, to make sure that they don't take it as a personal attack, because every time we're using data and telling a story, it's really important that they come along, because again, it's to enhance the value of the organization and not necessarily to end in a finger pointing, right? And that's really difficult at first, especially when you're new to a company, new to a team, is that people may feel personally attacked. If they're used to just answering to facts and figures and not, evolving a storyline, because the more you kind of talk about that, the more it's difficult if you're the head of R&D, right, and you're talking about product issues, that you're not feeling like, there's nothing that you can do about it. You need to be able to be accountable, to join in on the story, own it. And I think the story helps people jump involved. And I think the other thing that's really important too is it can't just be the CEO and the CFO, because oftentimes it ends up being, down to those two in a room figuring out the final storyline. You have to really bring people into the fold and make them feel part of it, because then again, they're then start talking the language, they turn around to their teams and start to teach some of the acumen, right, and the metrics that they need to be weighed on every day, right? And that the team should start to feel that, to live that. I think that's really important.
That makes, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm such a rude moderator, I apologize. So, Daryl, what are your thoughts? Anything to build on what Amanda said?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me next, because I was going to jump right into that.
There you go.
Absolutely, you got to be what I was going to add on to that is expectation setting, and it goes on with this other thing we discussed earlier about consistency, but getting everybody involved and aligned, and it really starts with the plan, right? Like you got to make sure the story starts with the plan almost sometimes with the finance, well, not with the finance person, for the whole organization. You wanted to do something, you're reporting against that, you didn't make it. You don't want to get in front of a room and accuse someone of not having made it without them being part of the narrative or being part of how you construct that narrative. You have to set expectations. You never want to ever deliver anything cold in a room, right? It's always got, and if it's surprising how many people, like I don't know when this exactly happened, but somehow I turned into a mentor rather than a mentee at some point, and I don't even know when that happened. And when did people start asking me, like, how does that work, or how did you do it? Like, what? I'm supposed to be asking the questions. How come people are asking me the questions? But it's surprising how many people are like, when I suggest, well, just reach out to them, talk to them before you like, not just ask, get them involved. And even up to the, even with young CFOs and the board, it's like, don't go into the board meeting cold. Talk to your board members, like, have one-on-ones with them. Don't do it as a group. Understand exactly what they're thinking about. Get their concerns in your mind, so when you get up there and work with your CEO to address these things, you can do that. If the story is consistent between individuals, not period over period, if it's numbers they're familiar with, but they're unpacked properly, you'll be much more successful at delivering the message. If you have a friendly audience, it's a lot easier, and you can help make that audience friendly and ensure that they're friendly and with you, even when it's a hard message to deliver, because you're all in this together. It's about not pointing fingers. It's about being positive. It's about being inclusive. It's about being human, not just a finance guy who throws up, like wallpaper of numbers and points to one in the middle, and that's not going to work.
Yeah, it's evolved because clearly I'm older than Amanda, and I'm confident that I'm older than Kevin and Daryl too. But
Sure.
At the start of my career, the CFO did exactly what you just advised not to do. And early in my career, it's just numbers guys. You have questions? Well, that's not appropriate. These are the numbers. Yeah. Learn them. So it doesn't really fly. But Kevin, anything you want to add to this conversation?
No, I think, those are pretty consistent. And again, coming from my position, I do see and hear a lot from different organizations around, some of the challenges maybe that they would have with keeping the story consistent, and then the ability or the time to actually mix it up, I think, is probably the biggest challenge. I think everyone would agree that they'd like to do this and kind of package, as was mentioned, sets of information with stories to different audiences. Again, depending on what the requirement is in your company. But the time, of course, is always against you when you're dealing with that. And that's probably one of the bigger challenges. But it's interesting, we did do a lot of survey work and study work with different communities globally, actually. And one of the most recent ones we've done came back with, I think it was around 65% of organizations are making their deadline goals when it comes to reporting, whether that's to one or multiple audiences in the organization, which of course in my position doesn't bode well, because that's a decent percentage. Say they're getting there, they're hitting it on time, and they're doing what they need to do. But then the study goes on with some ad lib comments from many. These are all senior financial professionals that were surveyed. At what cost are those reports actually making it on time? And you could go down the line of cost. It could be, personal time cost, they're working too many hours to get this done, all of those things. But the main cost was an opportunity cost, of getting the proper details or the right stories aligned with that data. So sure, you got it done, you dumped all the numbers to all the different audiences that were asking, but at what cost did you do that? And the opportunity cost usually is, were you able to distill the risks or opportunities from those numbers properly and tell that story, and appropriately tell that story? And I think that's probably one of the things that stuck out most to me when reading those details.
Makes sense. Either you own the story or the story owns you, which is it going to be, right? So, Kristen,
I think, Jack,
can you share I'm sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
I was just going to add, I think so many times, if stepping back to storytelling, it can be pure education. So if you're educating your audiences, right, especially when you're talking about the junior levels down through the organization, it can save so much, or it can give the teams the tools to train themselves, essentially. Because I think oftentimes we wait till something develops into a problem, and then it becomes a story that the CFOs have to follow up on or go and investigate. Whereas like if you can get ahead of something, like especially important in a larger divided organization. A few years ago, I led an overconsumption effort where, both revenue and margin were suffering because a lot of fixed fee contracts were being underscoped and overworked. And again, you would think that they have fully staffed with professional, project managers meticulously driving these things, but turns out, when we went into a deep dive and a jury-like project review meetings, that it was simply down to business acumen. So everyone was really just trying to do the best thing for the customer. No one had bad intentions, but instead we sat down and gave them the tools over many months to really identify like any sunk costs to those that we can get ahead of, right? And you teach them the tools to be able to avoid having it become a finance issue if you can educate across the right audiences and spend the time with them upstream. Again, not punitive, but teaching them, get a change in scope, or what is it that needs to be done? Do we have a scoping issue in the front of pricing, right? And if you can do those things and it start to get the team and the tactical front end to start speaking that language, then you've almost solved a problem before you have to deal with it again.
That makes sense. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, no, because I noticed the visual of me stopped. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but it was at an unfortunate angle. It was down like that. It looked like I'd fallen asleep or something, but good.
We knew you were with us.
Glad you can see hear me. So, Kristen, if you can still bring up those polling results, they're up for a little bit. I'd just like to get some insight on those. And it's not critical if you can't. So okay. So the question.
Thanks, Mr. McCullough. Do you want me to read these out loud for you?
Yeah, you have a better voice than I do.
Oh, I beg to differ, but thank you. Do you currently create different versions or formats of your quarterly results? 30% said no, just a report. 63%, a few different versions, and 8%, yes, several versions and increasing.
Okay, I'm a little surprised by that. What about you, Kevin? Is that surprising that the 8% is as low as it is?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, for me, I think this would depend, obviously, if you're a public or private company, that would obviously impact these results. You're obviously going to have at least two different versions, one internally and one externally, for most companies. And of course, some of them align with the external results and use those, but then, break them down, disseminate them into different parts of the business. I think that does speak to, though, in a lot of them, it's one of the questions coming up, so I won't drill into it here, but certainly the challenges that people face with, again, both Amanda and Daryl referring to kind of the breadth and task at hand to bring all this lots of volumes of data together, aligning those, organizing them, making sure we're positioning the right story. That's probably some of the deterrent to making multiple versions, I would say.
It's just too hard. Too hard, takes too long.
Too hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably true. Cool. Well, we're at about 12:45, and Kristen, I wonder if the audience has any questions, and if not, we'll just keep going on.
We do have one so far. Sorry.
Is it any good?
I could launch the third polling question too, if that's okay, Jack.
Yeah, why don't you launch
one
the third?
question. Do you see differences in different regions?
I didn't hear it, and maybe they didn't. Could you repeat it?
Sure. Do you see differences in the storytelling in different regions?
I'm guessing geographic regions probably is what the person means. So,
correct.
Yeah, is it different in the United States versus Europe versus Asia? Any one of you want to tackle that one?
I would definitely say I would want my storytelling to be different by audience. So I can imagine there would be difference by geo, different things going on, different ways of receiving things, being more direct or more, maybe needing to weave a different story.
And this was actually a two-parter, and I think I read part 2 first, so shame on me. How do you align with corporate messaging and balance spin in financial facts? So that may make a little bit more sense, so I apologize.
Kristen, you had one job. But Amanda, you want to take a shot at that one?
Sure, yeah. I've been able to work across many regions, and I know just, first of all, there's just very simple things when you're dealing with other cultures, being that we're in the US and usually as part of the global company, you want to make sure that you're just not, making declarations and showing up to tell them what to do. I think, again, when you're bringing people into the fold, you have to bring everybody in. And so especially when you're thinking about the culture dynamics between like 35 different small European nations coming together for one overall objective. And then, in Asia Pac as well, for one, you just have to, speak very slowly to make sure that everyone understands. You have to be careful not to use, slang that's in your own country that, makes sense, and to just very cleanly give that message. But then also understand what culture means to the operating model, and that's a big part of, I think, what we do as CFOs, because not only we have our numbers straight, and I think that's one thing, but a lot of our jobs revolve around HR and ensuring like utilization of a services model, right? There's a lot more to it than the model in Excel. It's what is the culture. I've dealt with a lot of M&A and a lot of, bringing companies into a parent company and making sure we can optimize. And, for the finance person, I think the biggest strength is you have access to all of the cross functions. And, usually there's an integration lead in every area. And nobody seems to cover culture, right? There's the sales, there's even HR to some extent, because they don't have the full view into the operating model. Is you can really use that to your advantage if you're involved in not only the numbers, but also the HR, the headcount, and what's happening on the revenue growth. You're the one that really can pinpoint some of the challenges in the drivers in the operating model when it comes to culture and the qualitative points. When you change you kind of pull the rug out from a company, the way they're operating, and expect them to scale in the way that the parent company thinks about scale. It can be a completely different story on the ground, right, in another country. And, just as simple as to what kind of, stories are being shared between employees, right, amidst an acquisition or amidst a new initiative coming out and rolling out. So it's very, very important.
It makes a lot of sense. Cool. Kristen, did you want to launch the third polling?
Yes, thank you, Jack. And I actually have 4 more questions that just came in. So I'll ask those after I launch the poll, if that's okay with the panelists.
That works for me.
Okay, the third polling question has been launched, and I'm going to ask an audience question. Let's see, what are the 3 most important things to do the first week of a new CFO job at a new company? And also another question, how do you handle different views on financial transparency? Your view, CEO view, board view, etc.
Okay, so the first of those 2, that sounded like more like 2 different questions than a 2-part question.
They were 2 different questions, yeah. Just in the interest of time, yeah.
Fair enough.
Maybe one could take. Yeah.
Why don't we start? What's the most important thing a CFO can do in the first 3 weeks on the job? I think was the time frame the person asked. So, Amanda, you and I actually talked about that in an article I interviewed for you earlier this year. So, do you want to take the first pass at it?
Sure. I think it ties into bringing everyone in, and how do you have to start telling a story by bringing people in. And the way that you do that, and the way that you're going to influence people, is building a relationship and understanding.
100%.
So, I'm sorry, could you hear okay?
Oh, I said 100%. 100%.
Oh, yeah. So it's relationship building. So for the first 3 weeks you're in a CFO role, make sure your door is open. You're out on the, you're out walking around talking to people. As soon as you kind of shut your door and put your head down, people will just assume and take on, that is your approach. So it's all about getting out with the leaders, working through the organization from all the different cross functions, and including down into their junior teams, hearing what's going on, understanding and asking questions. That's absolutely number 1. And as soon as you can speak their language, they start inviting you, right? And then they'll pull you in, and you can give them the tools to work on the fly, whether it be sales or R&D or delivery. All of a sudden, you'll just kind of be pulled into everything, and then you're never the one. So I think in finance, if you're left out and you're finding things out later, that's to your disadvantage. And so the best way to get a seat is to help them each as much as you can. With whatever they need, even if you're thinking, well, that doesn't really sound like something I should be doing. It's them inviting you in. It gains trust, credibility. And then when you need to deliver a really hard message 10% of the time, if you've helped them everywhere you can, everywhere else, they will say whatever you need. And that's just been a real, the most important part of the pie for me.
That sounds great. Kristen, what was the second part of that question? And we'll let Kevin and Daryl answer that one.
Second part of the question, how do you handle different views on financial transparency? Your view, CEO, board, etc.
Well, I can jump in on that. It's who's your boss. So it's I mean, and that can be different. But I view my job, I'm here to build a great business, no matter what business I'm in at that point in time. But the person's life I'm trying to make most easy and support is the CEO. And so, if they think it should be more transparent, it's going to be more transparent. Less. It's, you have to work on that narrative together. Really depends on who that person is. And yeah, that's my take on that one.
That makes sense. Kevin, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's obviously in line with both Daryl and Amanda's experience, more so than mine. So we can move on to the next question.
Okay, fair enough. Actually, do you want to do the polling results, Kristen? Look at that. I ask and it happens. So,
Is your current process for producing reports that include narrative collaborative and controlled? Yes, 42%, somewhat 51%, and no, 7%.
that's not bad. Only 7% said no. What do you guys think? Surprising?
I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, if you're an organization that is finding yourself pinched for time and hard to get data, and hard to put your story together, you're not going to have the time to be doing all the meetings, hanging out with all the people you should, and collaborating as much as possible. And I've seen that, lots of times. Usually, a lot of times when I've showed up in a new organization, it's been like that. And once you get the right technology, and you can really change that. If you've got a planning process or reporting process that is just so hard to create new versions or do different templates and bring more people in, you don't, right? But if you want to run an open, transparent finance organization that aligns people the best as possible, you have to get reports. You have to have as many stakeholders in the finance process as possible. So maximize the number of templates, maximize the number of people you can touch with reports that they understand, that talk to them. And so, yeah, if that could, yep.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to sort of jump a little bit just in the interest of time. But one of the questions, actually, Daryl wanted to ask the group, and hopefully you'll be prepared for this. But Daryl, who's the best storyteller that you've ever known from a financial standpoint?
Honestly, the best storytellers I've ever worked with, there's been some great CFOs, but I'm always really, I always go back to this great CEOs that I've had, a really great CEO tells a great financial story, and I've really learned a lot from them and admired them a lot, and they've helped me kind of come out of my shell as a finance person. And I was a typical introverted finance kid, finance person. When I was a kid, I remember my mom telling me stories about how I used to play underneath the card table when she had her friends over and they're playing bridge. But I mean, it's I had to get out of there, and it's the CEOs, the great CEOs, and some fantastic CFOs as well. But those CFOs really embodied a lot of CEO skills. And a great CFO needs to have the numbers, but that's kind of like the plumbing working in your house. The great house that commands the greatest value is the one with great street appeal, gorgeous bathrooms and kitchens, and that's the storyteller equipped with the right data, the right plumbing, the right data, but then being able to put it into a really beautiful package. And so many CEOs are great at that.
Interesting. Kevin, how about you? Any great storytellers? And I'll say, not that I know him super well, but your CEO, I've done a couple of webinars with him. He's certainly right up there. Is a great storyteller. So
yeah, absolutely. I've been fairly lucky in terms of in my career. Both our current CEO Jorge Martin, who you've spoken with, Jack, on previous webinars, as well as my previous company that I work with. I worked with him in a number of capacities actually over the years, and he was the CEO and worked very closely with the CFO. It was a very small organization, but one of the things I enjoyed most about what he had sort of changed when he came in, this is to Amanda's point actually, about when you're coming in that first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it might be, and we were all in that position. We all joined this company together, and we built it up and brought it to an acquisition point. But was transparency. The biggest change he made was to get up every month in front of the entire company, which included software developers, salespeople, marketing, and be as transparent as possible of where we were financially. And again, going back to some of the things I've watched that you've done, Jack, but making it consumable for all audiences. So, you can't assume that everyone, understands all the FASB rules or IASB rules.
Who cares?
Yeah. You have to sort of disseminate that information, but that really helped in getting, to Amanda's point, everybody on board and everyone working together towards a common goal. Whether it was a financial metric goal, or if it was an operational one, as Daryl mentioned earlier. So I think those sort of leaders, if you will, and being able to tell the story to really get the team to come together as a whole to work towards that common goal was a fantastic thing to see, and one of the first times I'd seen it in the organization. That continues here today with Certain as well with Jorge. Casey's listening.
Yeah, you got to say the right thing, right? Amanda, any amazing storytellers you've worked with over the years, be they, I mean, your boss or a colleague or whatever?
Again, I think it comes down to the head of sales and the CEOs, because they're always out there telling stories with customers. They're connecting the dots, they're connecting people. So I think I learned most from them that if you just connect people, then you know that's how you build your network, for one. And then when you're a visionary, you really think anything is possible, and you can, they look to me to then put it together. I just think that I've learned so much, to the point where when we had our company up for sale, I got into storytelling mode, because again, all the financials were just so and all prepared, and much of it was literally talking about SaaS, what makes SaaS unique, all of the different SaaS metrics, the drivers for the 2 to 5 year plans, to the point where we had so many meetings, and the CEO at the time had just started saying, no, you just go, and that's when I knew I had picked up enough of the storytelling, and that it's really mentorship, and I've had some really great mentors over the years.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have to say, this is like the quickest hour I've experienced doing a webinar in a while. We're at 12:59. Kristen, I believe we do have one more polling question that we have to get to, yes?
Yes, we do. And we do have a bunch of questions, but I don't think we're going to get to all of them. So I may pick the best one. And well, they're all great. And maybe I can ask the panelists if they wouldn't mind trying to tackle those on email, and we'll share with the audience tomorrow in a wrap-up email. If that works for you all, I'd really appreciate that. All right, final polling question we are launching. Do you see the need for financial narrative increasing for your organization? And I'm going to poll one of the audience questions, which may be a great note to end on. What advice would you have for a first-time CFO in developing their style of telling the story? And then if you wanted to, and if you had time, one other kind of relates for those that work for a smaller company, maybe with a leaner team. How would you advise them to navigate through that as well?
Okay. So the polling question's up. I think the first question was advice for a first-time CFO. So not necessarily your first day on the job.
Finding their own personal style of storytelling.
Okay. And why don't we start with Daryl, I guess. So
the question is, how do you find your own style?
Correct.
Yes.
Any advice there?
Well, it's I think almost answered in the question for me a little bit. Everyone has their own style. Be yourself, but don't be shy either. So I find a lot of finance people, it comes maybe a little bit with age, but just be confidence. Have confidence. And a lot of that comes from, making sure you have all the numbers and you're comfortable with that a lot of times for finance people, because that's who we are. We nerd out over the numbers, but don't get stuck in the numbers. Make sure you get to the story, understand who you're talking to, but also be yourself. Like there's different ways people deliver things, but definitely helps to be warm, not so clinical. Funny helps, warm it up, but know who you're talking to and what they're interested in hearing and what they're trying to achieve in life, and try to help them.
Be yourself, unless you're actually a jerk, then be somebody else. Right?
No, it's intentionally a jerk kind of thing.
How about you, Amanda? Any advice for the audience on, finding your voice?
I think exactly like Daryl said, you have to, and I said it before, you have to give as much as you can give when you can, so that when you do need something or there's a really hard line to be drawn, you have the respect. There was a time early on with I think it was like the first or second board meeting with a company, and I had to change the entire bookings model because it was just it was misleading. It's a choice of every company, but it was essentially misleading. And so, I was worried, oh, here it goes, I probably won't be here very long. But really, it turns out when you push back too, and again, as long as it's not everywhere, it's where it matters, you gain the credibility and respect, and it went over really, really well. And so I can't say enough, like, be vocal, but also be able to compromise wherever you can.
Okay, that makes sense. Kevin, I will give you the final word, sir.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of the second question, which is lean organization, smaller teams, making the best of who your teams are. And I think everyone would sort of align with this. A lot of the team members that help to build this story up and make it available for CFOs and CEOs to tell are very high valued employees, typically, CPAs, and, they've done a lot of work to get to where they are. And the low value work that sometimes they have to take on is not always the best job in the world, not the most, sort of liberating job, sinking into Excel spreadsheets and, PowerPoint decks and, doing all of that stuff. So investing in the team is probably the best case scenario, especially for very lean finance teams, which we deal a lot with. The more investment you can make in technology and just general things to give them the time they need, the work-life balance they need, the happier they will be, and of course, the better work they'll do. So I think that's standard across any business, but certainly is what we see is this narrative reporting sometimes can be a bit of a task if you don't have the right tools at your disposal. So I'll end on that, and hopefully that's helpful.
Now, that's fantastic. And Kristen, if you want to flash the final polling results, they might be mildly interesting.
There we go. Do you see the need for financial narrative increasing for your organization? Yes, 76%, somewhat 23%, and no 1%.
Okay, so 1% has it covered. Okay, well, I guess that will have to do. I apologize for going over, but we've got Kristen to blame for this. She was the facilitator.
That's her fault.
She did a lousy. It's not my fault. It's the moderator.
We didn't talk too much either. Nope.
So I don't want to hear about it. No, on a serious note, I do want to thank all of you, for being part of this. You've all been a big contributor to the CFO Leadership Council this year. And I think this is the third time we've worked with Certain on a webinar. So I do want to thank you for that. It's been great getting to know your organization and all the value you bring to our members. And I hope, is my image frozen to you guys or is it just to me? Oh, I'm seeing like a still photo with my mouth is wide open. Anyway, I'm a little too self-conscious, I guess. I do want to wish all of you a wonderful holiday season and thank you for being part of our webcast today. Kristen, any final words that I'm forgetting here?
No, just that you covered it all, Jack. Thank you all so much, and a special thanks to Certain. Look for a wrap-up email from us tomorrow. And again, our schedule starts 2021. We hope to have you back. Stay well and stay connected, and happy holidays to you all. Thanks again.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks.